few items that actually started my Cousteau adventure. And all this, the original red hat and sweater from the former chief diver of the Cousteau Society. I stumbled upon it on the early days of eBay. I was the only bidder. I think it paid about $60. And I sent a message to the seller, and he was like, "How did you come by this thing?" And it kind of caught me by surprise because I grew up with Cousteau and all that, but just to find something original. And it was at a time when, almost 20 years ago now, the interest was at an all-time low. So even I had forgotten. And then I was like, wait, this is here. And he said that he had worked for Cousteau and spent many years aboard Calypso and then the Winship Halcyon, which was their second ship. And he was like, if you want some of the stuff, I have other things. My wife worked on some of the wetsuit designs. She had fashion design experience and could sew. He's like, why don't you just send me a few $100 and I'll just put together a box of these things that I have and I'll send it to you. And so he did, and then he's like, if you're interested in this, you should, talk to this person. And so I sent emails or phone calls, and for almost 10 years, basically every day I would do something, either follow a lead or send an email or read an article. And then I kind of just became this depository for, it was the same thing, I just kept interacting with all these people that said, oh, I work with Cousteau and I have these things and nobody wants them and you're the only one. And so we'll send it to you. And I'm like, okay, this is awesome. And just more and more stuff. And so now I have the largest private collection of original Cousteau equipment, memorabilia, and documents in the world. The few of the things that I brought here, actually the red hat sweater. This is the Winship Halcyon with the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Cousteau did multiple expeditions here to the Puget Sound region. They featured the involvement days where they were interviewing all the kids and stuff. They did one in Seattle. And there's a bunch of different connections here. Cousteau's ship Calypso was actually built in Ballard, in the shipyard there. So that's another connection to the region here. If you're interested in a little more about the Cousteau and the Puget Sound, I have an exhibit down at the Foss Waterway Seaport. That's where we're going to be hosting the event for the third Thursday event on the 18th of November. Come down there. I'll have a lot more equipment and stuff featured in film. And then an existing exhibit down there. I have Jacques Cousteau's personal wetsuits on display down there. The tanks from the film The Silent World, which won the Academy Award, was featured in the film. So come check that out. I brought the ad that was featured in the film here about oil from the Silent World, and I find it very interesting that it's sponsored by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company in partnership with British Petroleum. So again, it's kind of like the early parts of the career versus the later parts of the career. You saw in some of the films, they had the storyboards for all the things. That's actually, all those documents came from my collection in the film. We were photographed in my studio here in Tacoma and then added into the film. Actually, I'll show you in a minute. I brought they're from the original proposal. So when they proposed like the television series, they actually created like a scrapbook and they would submit that. And there are 3 copies, and I have 1 copy. And the copy I have actually was featured in the Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau. He's like flipping through the book. So I brought that with me, so I'll show you in a little bit. And this is just a script from the Undersea World. This belonged to Joseph Campanella, who was the narrator. So it has all of his production notes in there. Many scripts. But anyways, I have all these different things. And that's kind of how I ended up becoming, 2 ways I became involved in the film. One, part of the production team were involved with the Academy Award-winning film Free Solo. It was a rock climbing film from, I guess, a couple years ago now. And Tacoma local, Mikey Schaefer, was involved in that film. He actually appeared on screen. And he's a longtime friend of mine and climbing partner. And I sent him a message. I was like, I hear the team's doing a Cousteau thing. He's like, don't worry, I already told him about you. And so it's like an interesting little tie-in. And that same crew, not the production team, but then the crew that made that film is also behind the rescue film that's showing here at the Grand. So check that out. that's kind of my story. Lots of interesting stuff over the years. I've gotten to travel and know a huge number of the crew, all the family members on both sides, Jean-Michel and Francine on the other side, and her kids, Pierre-Yves and Diane. And that's been kind of a great adventure. I've gotten to stay in the home of Frederic Dumas, who was featured, one of the three musketeers of diving in the south of France, and then visit the Cousteau family home, which stayed on Simone's side of the family with Jean-Michel, one of the few things. And I've gotten to dive a lot of the locations, like where they would spearfish and do all that, and snorkel and do all of that. But can I answer any questions? Does anybody have any thoughts about the film or curiosities? Or
I have a question.
Yes.
You always think of Cousteau with the red hat like you have on,
yes.
but is there any significance to that? How did that
Right, the red hat. Where did that come from? So the red hats are actually a homage to the early generation of working divers, the helmet divers. When you're put a giant metal thing on your head and go into cold water, it's very cold in there. And so they would wear red hats. So the red hats are the traditional garb of helmet divers. And so he adopted that. They also, Cousteau always loved hats. So they would have aboard Calypso, like in the festivities, they'd be like, who has the craziest hat? And so there's all these pictures like in National Geographic and stuff of like people just wearing these outlandish hats. And then he also recognized, like from aesthetic point of view, that having identifying features that tied all the teams together. That was one of his big contributions in terms of the filmmaking and the television, was that his diving equipment that he developed for the film, particularly the Undersea World, it was unlike anybody had ever seen. It was very team-oriented. You had these like flocks of people, swimming in formation, and they had matching gear, and you couldn't buy that gear, and it looked futuristic. And a lot of that was featured in the original production art. And actually the guy that kind of came up with what I call the Cousteau aesthetic for television is a guy named Jean-Charles Roux, who's a kind of production designer, artist, model maker. I did lots of things with Cousteau over the years, and he lived outside of Monaco. Cousteau was director of the Oceanographic Institute in Monaco, which is a pet project of the royal family, and that famous building comes down onto the cliffs and over the Mediterranean there. If you ever get to go, it's quite spectacular.